Welcome, my children. This is Tristyn Lee 2.0.
Baby girl love my bop and unlike me too.
Increase calories, increase fat, decrease walking on a new level. Today, we train the deltoids. Starting with rear delts. This is a movement that Jordan Shallow taught me the other day when I was training with him. Because this machine is only one cable, usually I'd use the one that has the 2 cables so that I can spread it apart. But since this is only one, Instagram guru'd this, put on a lat pull down bar, put on 2 handles on top of that. No BOSU balls involved, unfortunately. And essentially what I'm doing is recreating the 2 cable pull. A lot of people when they're training rear delts, they do like a fly motion, but what I've shifted to doing more so is a rowing motion. And I've found that I've been able to grow my rear delts a lot better. So what we're doing here, almost like a normal mid-back row, pushing through my feet and keeping my body forward and my chest up. And now when I start the movement, I'm fully protracted and I'm actually focused on almost pressing forward as much as possible so that I'm disengaging my traps, stabilizing my shoulder, and then only pulling from my rear delt. So when I pull, I'm gonna keep pronated, squeeze my chest, grip hard because that actually sends signals to fire my delt, grip, and then drive hard up. And then you'll see as I come to the back of the motion, I'm not just coming straight back like this because that's obviously gonna engage a lot of my back. Pull in a straight line, and then as I come to this back point, I'm actually gonna drive my elbows slightly upwards and focus on only squeezing through my rear delt. So I'm here, pushing, drive, protract, drive. This movement's absolute death if you do it right. Sometimes it's good to have someone though coach you through this and guide you through this, because the initial first few times that I tried doing this, first few sets, I did let my upper back and my traps take over. But when I had Jordan Shallow there, aka the muscle dog, natural, right?
I'm too cool for the rules, baby, get off of me.
He was able to tap on my rear delts and say like, okay, yeah, that's what's actually firing. So we'll do like 3 or 4 sets here. I usually start with side delts, but I decided to switch it up today. Sometimes I find when I start with my rear delts, I'm able to engage my external stabilizers better, and then when I go into any sort of pressing movements, I feel a little bit more primed to do so. I have old man shoulders, I have old man knees, so I gotta get prepared whenever I'm going into these movements. It's crazy how much it affects your connection with whatever muscle group you're trying to contract. When you actually actively grip the bar, certain neuromechanical receptors, when you grip, it actually sends a signal to that area to stabilize or to fire. So one of the cues that we had for any sort of movement that involves gripping is knuckles down. And basically what you're doing is you're actively gripping the bar, so that way you're not just hanging loose. So it's kind of counter to what I initially thought, which is like just disengage your forearms as much as possible. But when you actively grip, it tells your brain to engage those stabilizers. So we're gonna do a rack press with a barbell. So generally the way I've been structuring my workouts is that any movement that requires more internal stabilization or bracing, whereas a skill-based movement where I have to focus on engaging those certain stabilizers, like even the rear delt movement, I'll prioritize that and put that at the beginning of my workout. And then as I get to later on in my workout, I'll go to movements that have a little bit more external stabilization. So whether that's a chest supported rear delt fly or a chest supported lateral raise where I don't have to focus as much on bracing, I can just go all out, just lock myself in, and then increase my output there. Anything that does require a little bit more skill, a little bit more focus, you want to put that closer to the start when you have more energy. Baby plates, they're cute. These are Tristyn size plates. This is a 45, it's just made for me. Although I did start with a movement that was gonna get me a little bit more prepared, I still do like taking a little bit of time to get up to my top set to make sure that I am ready to go all out on those top sets. I'm probably gonna do 2 working sets here where I'm actually going close to failure, because it is a movement that there is a lot of internal stabilization involved. It is difficult to push the output extremely far, especially because you are going heavy and you don't want to risk injury. So instead, what I'll do is I'll leave more of my like drop sets, giant sets, whatever it may be, anything with a high intensity technique to later on when there's a movement that's a little bit more externally stabilized. 155 on the bar, nothing extremely heavy, but I'm really just focused on driving from the bottom as hard as I can, exploding, and squeezing my delts hard. Keeping everything tight throughout the entire motion, making sure that my lats are staying tight and engaged and my core is in a good position so that I'm able to drive more output. Another thing that I learned from Jordan when I was training with him, specifically with this movement, is a lot of people say not to allow your wrist to fall back, but he actually told me to do the opposite. Allow your wrist to get into a position where the bar is actually going to be stacked above your elbow or in a center position. It's going to be stacked directly over the center of your body so that you're able to drive more output. Just because your fingertips are falling back, if the bar is pressing directly through this strong point where it's stacked from your forearm to your elbow to all the way up to your hand, then you're fine. You're in a good position to drive more output. Sometimes having your thumb and your fingers wrapped around the bar, people don't have certain wrist mobility or forearm mobility, so they're not able to really get underneath it and engage their lats to drive more output. So instead, don't worry too much about allowing your wrists to fall back slightly or your fingers to fall back slightly. Just really focus on keeping your lats tight and driving through that center area so that the bar is centered and stacked all the way down. And then as you drive up, you're driving directly overhead. The weight is going directly down over that center. You're not falling forward like this. Sometimes when you wrap your thumb forward, it forces you into an internally rotated position because you don't have that wrist mobility, the wrist flexion. Allow it to fall back, drive directly overhead. So last thing I'm gonna talk about here, I know it's a lot of stuff to kind of break down, is actually gonna be pelvic position, because a lot of people don't take that into consideration when they're doing compound lifts. And obviously that's extremely important if you're trying to internally stabilize and you're trying to increase your output. So with a movement like this, I wanna make sure that my pelvis is in a good position to allow my core to brace, to allow my lats to come into a good position, to allow for proper breathing, all these different things that come together to increase that overall output. Before I even start the movement, I'm pushing through the floor and I'm making sure that my pelvis is stabilized so that my core is not in an unstable position where there's gonna be more pressure on my lumbar spine. I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty lit right now on stimulants. Freaking Will Tennyson. Donut King.
Fuck, I look like stressing. I be finessing.
So one thing that Jordan and I talked about as well when I was training with him, we actually started with our lateral raise movement, but we started with a cable rather than a dumbbell. I do prefer using a cable over a dumbbell, but since it was taken, we just decided to do dumbbell, and it was later on in the workout, so it didn't really matter. But when it comes to lateral raises, any sort of lateral raise, your delt is only working after about 15 to 35 degrees range. Anywhere between here and here is gonna be your subscap and other stabilizers. And then as you come up to here, your delt is gonna be most active at around 120 degrees. So when you use a cable lateral raise, essentially what it does is it allows you to keep that constant tension all the way throughout the motion. So all the way from here, 15 to 35 degrees, all the way up to 120 degrees without it going under shoulder joints. Generally speaking, I do like using the cable instead, but since it was taken, we went with dumbbell. There's some exercises, for example, I did dumbbell shoulder press today. I felt like doing dumbbell shoulder press today. There's some exercises that you may just like to do, and that's the fun of bodybuilding and training, is that you get to push yourself in whatever limits, whatever exercises, whatever capacity you really want to. So have fun, lift heavy, increase your calories, you'll feel amazing, and then go get a crazy pump. And then eventually get juicy shoulders.